Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the 9 a.m. session. The lesson that I have learnt is the closer you are to the organising committee for one of these things, the more likely you are to be chairing the 9 a.m. panel. So, unlike yesterday, we're not expecting any fire alarms today. So if you do hear them, or it goes dark, like it did yesterday on us, the fire exits are out of those doors at the back that you came in through, or down over here, and the assembly point is under the railway arches. Is there anything else that we need to cover in our housekeeping? Nikki, looking over? All good? You need a microphone unless...
Thanks, Siri. So anybody who's new to the room, we've got runners in the room to bring microphones to you if you want to add a question to the panel. Please do wait for that microphone to come to you for the benefit of our online participants, to make sure that they can hear the question that's being asked. Doesn't matter how loudly you shout, the guys online aren't going to hear you, so please do wait for those microphones. Got two lovely runners here. Stick your hand in the air. They'll come to you with a microphone. Thank you.
And there's been a real good sort of churn of different people coming on different days. If you didn't see any of the earlier stuff, I think the main message is the only stupid question is the one that you don't ask. And this is your event, so please do shape it as whatever way you want. Everything that's been done here has been done by Google Docs, and kind of just so these guys on the panels can actually shape it in whatever way that they see fit. So it could go in any direction. But so far, it's gone in a reasonable one, so which is good. So this, I'll now switch to this and we'll start running this first panel of the day. Okay, so this is I've changed tone, high pitch now. Oh, no, I don't want to shut down my computer, please no. Okay, brilliant. So this is the grant writing panel, and I think as a kind of starting point on this, in terms of kind of digital research infrastructure professionals, why is it important that we understand grant writing? And I know a lot of people are in the room who have had successful grants, but there's a whole bunch of people that are DRI professionals that even thought they might even try to even get involved in the process. And I think it really goes down to this sort of the relationship building and credibility with researchers. In general, the more things that you do as a DRI professional that look like the things that the researchers do, the more credibility you tend to build with that demographic of people. And whether that's helping them win grant money and be that important person that inserted that paragraph that gave it a technical depth which it wouldn't have had otherwise, or whether within your organization you actually go out and get money that wouldn't have come in otherwise on your own, and you become essentially a rainmaker. Okay, these are really important things that can really sort of establish that kind of professional credibility. So as we kind of move into these kind of leadership topics on today, I thought it'd be appropriate to kind of kick off with at 9 a.m. with something around grant writing. So we've got a kind of mix of people who've been involved in writing their own grants or helping others develop their ideas and form into grant proposals. Obviously, I'm kind of here because I ended up writing a grant that got the money for this in some ways, so that's kind of interesting. And we also have the kind of, hopefully Billy will be as open as possible with what he's about to say, but Billy from EPSRC here, who can really maybe talk about the process a lot more in terms of how you can actually get involved, how you can get an insight in how the system kind of works. And the more that you understand, more understanding you have of the system, the more you kind of can, maybe it helps shape ideas and how you convey them and that sort of thing. So I'll start. Everyone's in the room, aren't they, for this panel? We're not got anyone online. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to start with Phil Hasnip over on the right, and we'll just work through and just everyone can introduce themselves.
Well, yes, I'm Phil Hasnip, based at the University of York, and I'm an EPSRC RSE Fellow, which was a fun grant writing exercise, and probably my first as PI.
I'm Paul Richmond. I'm from the University of Sheffield. I hold an academic title, but don't let that fool you. I'm a research software engineer. I run the RSE group at Sheffield. My grant writing experience is quite mixed. I've got a collection of grants in all kinds of different areas as a CI, and various bits of grants as a PI that are very kind of applied, obviously software engineering and applied things, quite a bit of industry funded research as well. But my main experience with grant writing is similar to Phil in that I was a recipient of one of the RSE fellowships in the first round.
Sylvain?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sylvain Laizet from the Department of Aeronautics at Imperial College London. I'm a reader in computational fluid dynamics, and I heavily rely on high-performance computing and research software engineering and research software engineers for my research. I also led few UK-wise initiatives like the UK Turbulence Consortium, the CCP Turbulence, which is a computational collaborative project where we heavily rely on research software engineering. And also I'm involved in the Excalibur project that is, dealing with the transition to exascale computing in the UK.
Billy?
Hi, I'm Billy McGregor. I'm a portfolio manager at EPSRC. I'm on in the infrastructure team. I'm on the digital side of it. I've worked with most of the people on this panel when writing a grant. We're a friendly bunch of people, and I think I'll leave it at that for now. Come and talk to us.
Okay, great. So maybe Sylvain, we'll start with you on this. And just around kind of setting the sort of scene around thinking to a grant that you have, that was successful, right? Okay, pick one of many, right? Essentially, when did the thinking start about that in relation to kind of there's a deadline, okay, there's a call, but when did the thinking actually start? About what you were going to do and sort of.
Yes, so it depends. There's two types of grants. There are the one where there is a call with a fixed deadline, and for those one, usually you need to think very quickly and you need to come up with some ideas very quickly because usually the time frame is quite short. And you also have the grants where there's no time frame. So, for example, a PSRC responsive mode where you can submit anytime. You also have PSRC fellowships that you can submit anytime. For those ones, based on my experience, for me it's taking a couple of years at least from thinking of an idea and pressing the submit button. It's 2 years. Just to make sure that everything is coming to place. I could probably write a first draft within 3 months or so, but it's not going to be good enough. So it really depends on the opportunities and what type of grants you are looking for. For the one with a deadline, it's extremely tricky, but the good thing is that it's going to be tricky for everyone applying. So everyone will be on the same boat, okay? So that's the good thing. When there is a deadline, you need to think fast. You need to heavily rely on people around you. So what we do in my department, we have proposal surgery, for example, and this is the most amazing thing. It's time consuming for other people, but basically we have an internal process where we submit our grants. It doesn't have to be finalized 100%. You just need to have a document of some sort. And then experienced people in my department will give you honest and direct feedback. And this is the best thing in the world because very often when you write a grant, you only think, well, you are so focused on the writing, on the project, on the ideas that you may miss something. So having external opinion is extremely valuable. You can, of course, ask colleagues at different universities if they are willing to help you, of course, if they are not also applying for the same call. But I think it's very important to get the views of outsiders. For me, this is the key message. I don't know how long I should talk.
No, well, I mean, perhaps I'll sort of. I think that's one of the really important. So from a kind of, service provider perspective, kind of thing. I think, and things like the RSE fellowships, I think were kind of really good things for people to kind of be involved in many ways, because you got an insight into that kind of the volume of work and the amount of headspace that a kind of an academic or anybody applying for these grants has. And literally, how many times has someone come to us right at the last minute, which is essentially, they've now got the case in, right? They've got it written, it's sort of all done, and they're going, I now need to get a quote for storage, I need to get a quote for everything that I need for this sort of thing, and I need it in negative time. I think once, if you've been involved in the grant writing process or try to develop these things that have been everyone says, why can't they involve us at the start? It was 2 years ago was the start here, right? For some of these ideas that are coming through. And at that moment in time, literally a day before the submit button is pressed, that's the point where the headspace is there to think about all the other stuff that you've totally forgotten because you just haven't had the mental capacity to deal with it. And maybe RSC's sort of fellows maybe reflect on some of that in terms of your fellowship applications and just, the pressures that were there. So Phil, do you want to just comment on?
Yeah, so I think there are two kinds, in a sort of cartoon picture, there are two kinds of grant. There's the grant where you had the idea and then it bubbles along, you don't know what you're doing, and then something comes along that makes you actually write the grant, which might be just realizing, hang on, it's been 2 years, I need to do something. Or it might be a particular call comes out that's exactly that area, and you think, well, now's my chance. The other side is quite similar. A call comes out with a short timeline, in intent to submit in 6 weeks. Write what you're going to do. And that's kind of what I do. What do I want to do that's that sort of thing? And in that case, the last minute can be the first time you'd actually really sat down and thought about it. You can go to an RSE team, for example, and go, I'd love to work with you on this. I need to submit tomorrow. And they say, why didn't you come when you first had the idea? Well, that was 11 o'clock last night. I thought you wouldn't be working. And they say, you don't know RSE teams. No. So there's a whole process and there's a whole range of things. I mean, for me, I think the first time I wrote the fellowship, I wrote the kind of a collection of thoughts that I'd been building up for probably 10 years about how I really wanted to work and what I really wanted to do. And the mistake I made is I thought about what I wanted to work and what I wanted to do, and not necessarily how that fitted in with the community and how that experience could be transferred to things that I didn't know about. So I said, I'll do this in my program and it'll be lovely. And I didn't think, oh yeah, wouldn't it, I should talk to these other people and maybe I have things to share with them. Oh, try not hitting the microphone. And things they can share with me. So it's a strange experience, and I'll echo what Alan said. I think it's a good thing for RSEs to do, even if it's the one grant you ever write ever and it's not successful. I think just that process alone was massively valuable. And from a fellowship point of view, I got it in the second time of asking, and I think I had a much easier ride the second time because I'd been through that the first time and failed.
Yeah, so I think my fellowship experience was perhaps a little bit different because I'd never heard of research software engineering until the fellowships came out. And I hands up, absolutely, I hadn't. And same, I see Louise with a hand up there as well, the same. But it was a fantastic thing when it did come out because it came at such a crucial point in my kind of career where I was having doubts about how I fit within the academic environment. That it came at such an important time for me to see that. So the ideas that I had for it, somewhat like Phil, I'd been developing over a period of years, but struggling to make it kind of fit within, traditional grant funding. I'd been picking up bits of money from doing industrial collaborations and working with other people and being a CI, but never been able to kind of lead something and think about something that would build my own portfolio. So when it came out and I saw it, it was a reactive thing for me. It was kind of like, yeah, I've got all these ideas behind the scenes. I know kind of, I know what I'd like to do, and this is the opportunity that lets me kind of write it down and put it together. obviously there was a lot of work went into kind of turning that into a coherent fellowship application. It wasn't just a case of, I know exactly what I'm going to do, let's write it down. It took a lot of work and iterations, and I was very fortunate in that I had a huge amount of support in doing that. Probably far more than most people would get at Sheffield, and it was the result of being on kind of a previous fellowship, and I think that particularly helped the fellowship that I had, because I'd had not really a succession, but I'd had a smaller fellowship, and then I was on a 4-year fellowship that the Vice Chancellor had awarded. I'd somehow managed to convince him that what I was doing was research, even though it was really just software development. And yeah, because of that, there was a cohort of us, and we had quite a bit of training on things like grant writing. There was an expectation that all of us should go out and win an ERC grant, or a platform grant with EPSRC. So when this fellowship, when the RSC fellowship came up, and I said that is absolutely what I should be doing, there was quite a bit of pushback on that, kind of like, no, that's not a proper fellowship. I was like, hang on a minute, I think you'll find it is. But once they came round to the idea, I had a huge amount of support, and they did a lot of work behind the scenes in supporting me in terms of finding academics for me to talk to about my proposal. And even once it had gone in and been accepted, the process of going to interview is quite daunting if you've never done that before. So setting up things like mock interviews are absolutely essential. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, we're touching on kind of some of the challenges, some of the things, the structures that are in place that are kind of been, helpful there, right? So, Sylvain, come back to you around, what was something that was really helpful, maybe, some text that someone provided or whatever, and what was really unhelpful? Because DRI professionals, we like to be helpful. So what drove you nuts during the grant writing process, and what actually made everything like a real pleasure to do?
Right, that's a tough question. What drives me nuts usually is the costing part. It's often quite a challenging task to put your budget or your costing together. That could be quite tedious. Very often, depending on the call, once again, you might have some restrictions. There might be a limit. That's why, by the way, it's hugely important to read the call and all the document 5 times at least.
Only sure. 5? Yeah. How many times do you really think you've read the call document?
Probably more than that, but to start with, you need to read every single line of the call, because there's a lot of information there, and if you are missing something, that could be quite detrimental. But yeah, the budget usually for me is the most painful part. The part that I really like is when these are collaborative project, and you need to talk to other people about your ideas and how you are going to build your grant is interacting with colleagues and trying to find a collaborative way to write a grant. I think I really enjoyed it. I will echo my fellow colleagues here that having mock interviews is super important. Even if you think you are confident, and even if you think that you will be able to deal with the questions from the panel, having mock interview has been a game changer.
It's like a rite of passage to have that first one be absolutely excruciating as well, isn't it? And
yeah, the first mock panel is traumatizing, but it's so helpful. It's so helpful. It's making a huge difference. The other thing that you want to make sure is allow you plenty of time at the time of submission. There's usually a lot of document to prepare. You might be missing one, you might be missing some information in your costing. Don't wait the last minute, especially if you rely on other people. It's very important to allow all the people involved in a grant, they have enough time to provide support for you. If you wait the last minute, it's always stressful and difficult for everyone. So I think that's very important.
I think you can't rely on the date on the core document either, because it has to go through your research office.
Absolutely, you need to remove 5-10 days before that. It's crucial to to prepare everything with plenty of time. Even if somewhere the deadline is in 6 weeks, I have plenty of time. Start as soon as possible. Contact your research services, say, oh, I'm going to submit a grant for this code. I will need a costing. I don't know yet, but I will give you all the information as soon as possible. Or I need to talk to the RSC team. I will need some costing, some ideas, some technical information. Do it as soon as possible. Otherwise, it's going to be stressful for everyone.
Phil, would you like to?
I'm nodding along here. Yeah, this is very familiar. I think there's a certain thing when you put it together. I thought, oh, what am I going to do? You know, and you write this thing which eventually becomes the case for support, and you think, I've done it. No, you haven't. and then you get onto the research grants office, and they go, yeah, you know that deadline. Take a week off that. We need it a week in advance. But also, they don't care about the case. They care that it exists. But they probably don't even look at it. They care about, well, what are you asking for? What's the money? And even at that level, you go, oh, what am I being paid? Or if I want an RC on my team, what will they be paid? That's not the figure. the university, wait, no, you need estates costs, infrastructure costs, this person has a pension, this person, you know, the money is not what you think the money will be. You know, you get £1 million grant, and it sounds a lot of money, right? It did to me. Not that much money when all the full economic costs have been there, and there's 2 or 3 people on the grant for 3 to 5 years. It doesn't go very far. But yeah, I think the case is your darling. That's what you care about, and it's almost only you who cares about that.
And the review panel.
And until it goes to review panel.
Can I add something about that I'm just thinking right now? When you write your case of, the case for support or the main document for your grant, you focus on the science and what you want to achieve and so on and so on. What's really important as well is to think what the referees are going to think about this project. You need to think a little bit carefully about, okay, at the end you want to get funded, right? So you need to think about, my proposal is going to be with other similar proposal of high quality, high caliber, but they are going to be reviewed by 3 or 4 reviewers who might know the UK system, who might be international reviewers. They are the one who will try to find something that is not right in your proposal, and you need to think about that. So it's a slightly different angle. You are not necessarily trying to write the best proposal. You are trying to write a proposal that cannot be attacked, in a sense. It's slightly different than, I will try to do my best. I have a great idea. This is what I want to achieve. You need to think carefully what the reviewer will think, and is there somewhere in my proposal something that can be attacked, sorry. And I think if there's no flaws in your proposal, that's a good starting point.
Okay, we're going to throw things open to comment. Oh,
sorry.
Billy? I was looking at his Marion.
For the comment, then.
Okay, we'll go for Marion and then to Billy.
Yeah, there are 2 questions from the online participants here in the chat. The first one is, where do you find information about available and suitable grant codes for DRI and RSE professionals?
Billy?
Well, the UKRI Funding Finder is where I looked first. Nodded along to everything you guys said there. The one thing I would add is communication is key. Communicate to your university that they might know, but also communicate to us. Do come and ask. We're not a black box. We'll tell you, at least indicate sort of if something is coming up. We do try and have clear communication lines with the community. Sylvain knows that the HEC Consortia call came out earlier this week, and we've been telling the current HEC Consortia call all along, like it's coming, and then finally it drops. And I guess you just need to be ready for that.
I want to add also, at Imperial College, it's probably the same in other universities. There is a RSC team. They have a newsletter. There is usually a lot of information. They will tell you all the funding opportunities. So yeah, communicating with your colleagues is the key to find what are the opportunities.
There's quite often research sort of email networks sort of thing which the research office kind of runs, and people, well, researchers tend to get these emails and actually do read those kind of like very carefully when there's kind of like, this is the funding summary this week, this is the funding summary for next week or whatever. But if you're known to your research office, when something a bit kind of left of field comes in, like the RSC fellowships or the DRI calls, if you're known to them, you get a little knock on your door, and a nice person comes along to help you actually develop that sort of thing for the first time, which is really so. A good relationship with the research office, I think, is essential, and whatever communication mechanisms they use.
I would say every funding call is a research software engineering funding call, right? So, and it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for something to be a PI on, if you're only thinking about the kind of the RSC fellowships, then you're probably going to be disappointed, because there's very few funding opportunities that do directly fund an RSC as a PI. You know, the fellowships, and there's been a small number of software calls, and Billy, can we have more software calls, please? Yeah, you'll be disappointed because they are quite limited. Fundamentally, the funding agencies fund research, not necessarily software development, but we all know that software development is part of that process. So every funding call is an opportunity for funding research software engineering, whether it's through an RSC group or building a collaboration with someone else. And even before I had an RSC group, before I knew what RSC was, I'd been building my track record by being a CI on other people's grants where we could apply the software that I wanted to apply. So I'd say broaden your horizons and look at everything.
Could I add as well that when you get established and the research grants people know you, and EPSOC might know you, and remember that there are people where you were 3-5 years ago who might not know about grants, and think about telling people, emailing your community, there's this opportunity coming up, and being the person who supports other people to write grants as well.
Question from Marion, have you got another?
Yeah, just first of all, some comments here in the chat on that. Claire is saying, for info on calls, join the UK RSE Slack, and you could join the Society for the newsletters too. We always advertise any RSE relevant calls a lot and have organized a webinar in the past when an RSE fellowship call was out. And Sarah is saying, as more and more research projects involve computation, it is becoming increasingly essential that DRI professionals provide advice on the e-infrastructure resources needed and their costs. Yeah. The next question here is, when preparing a grant with a short deadline, do the panel find it easier to repurpose something that they've already got to hand, or start from scratch?
Never do that.
Never.
Start from scratch. Well, that's my opinion.
I agree.
I disagree.
No, you've got a drawer full of things that you can...
I think I'll be careful here. A lot of what we do is kind of incremental, whether it's software development and kind of a combination of copying and pasting things from Stack Overflow until we have a working solution, or whether it's writing a grant, there's always bits of stuff that I'll go back to and pick out. So, you can't just recycle a grant and stick something back in that's previously failed, but you can kind of go and take parts of it and repurpose it. And maybe it's just because I hate writing, but I find it much easier to do that.
I mean, definitely, if you have good ideas and they're not funded, you want those ideas to be funded. We don't throw the ideas away because they weren't successful first time. I'd never have got my RSC fellowship if I'd taken that view. But you don't pick something up and rebadge it and put it in again. That's setting yourself up to fail. It's, if something wasn't funded, think about why it wasn't funded, who can improve that, who you can bring in, what you can do differently, what wasn't worth doing, and reshape it. So I guess I kind of agree and kind of disagree.
I think the difference is perhaps a fellowship is perhaps quite different to a traditional research grant, in that a fellowship's very personal and it's about you and your track record and the things that you've done, and it's, you can't really change those. You can emphasize them in different ways, but it's not just, proposing just a new piece of research, for example. It's an investment in a person, a fellowship.
I think You took what I was going to say there, Phil. I fully agree with that. I would just add again, communicate. If you've got a piece that you think is really good and it might be good for this again, let some other people see it. Show it to other people. They'll be able to pull it apart and say, this could be improved, this could be improved.
I think also you end up, maybe a week or 2 weeks before the deadline for these things. You've got like 6 pages or 8 pages, maybe if you're lucky to get, your response in, and you've got like 20 sides of just lots of people's contributions. It's all brilliant, and at some point, you take all that, you read the documentation again and again and again and again and again, and then personally, I rewrite the entire thing from scratch. Like I've just started, so it is one coherent thing rather than bits and pieces of everyone else's contributions. Which means that fine paragraph that has been handcrafted by all the DRI professionals to be perfect ends up like 3 words. But a lot of thought's gone into those 3 words. Matt?
Just a comment. Paul and Phil both talked a lot about the RSE fellowships. Just to point out, that's now finished. There have been 3 rounds of RSE fellowships. So for the DRI professionals are thinking, oh, that sounds really good. I'd love to be an RSE fellow myself. As a named call, that has come to an end. There are still the Open Plus, the new name for the generic fellowship schemes, and RSE fellows can apply for that. But the old scheme that we've seen appear of a gathered, targeted call with a fixed deadline, that's not around anymore. But RSE fellows can still apply for personal fellowships, but you're up against everybody else who's applying for other kinds of fellowships at the same time.
Yeah, saying it's finished makes it sound like UKRI have kind of given up on it, but that's absolutely not the case. It's been successful because what's happened is the open fellowships have changed their scope to be inclusive of software development. So although you're up against, kind of everyone who's applying, it can be judged on the fact that it is a fellowship about research software engineering rather than kind of purely based on a research domain.
I think just if you are looking to apply, we have a whole fellowships team now. So instead of you being sort of siloed by yourself, you're part of that. So again, get in contact with us. We have a team that can help you.
Chris.
Thanks. I can't help feeling there's a slight elephant in the room with software engineering, because software engineering, as we're all agreed, I think, in the room, is totally important for translating what for me is an idea on a whiteboard or in a dry academic paper in statistics and turning it into a tool that other people can use. And the software engineering that goes into that is not necessarily novel software engineering, but it's got to be done well. But I guess what I'm asking is what are your thoughts around where we can apply for money to achieve that kind of translation? Should we be talking to RSEs to kind of lead those translation calls? Should we be looking at EPSRC, or should we be looking at our domain-specific funding councils?
Okay, I'm wondering whether to ask a researcher or a funder first.
I can say something.
Okay, Sylvain.
I'm going to talk about my personal experience. I've been lobbying with my head of department and my faculty to do something at a university level or at a faculty level or school level or departmental level. And so recently in my department, it's not just me, it was a few people working around computational fluid dynamics. We made a business case, and we can probably talk about that this afternoon in another session. But we managed to convince the department and the faculty that RSE is important, and then we need someone on site with a permanent position who can support, as you said, all the activities that you mentioned, independently of grant incomes. Okay, we've shown in the last 5 years, this is all the grants that we've managed to get without any support from the department. We said, okay, there's a lot of experimental activities, there's a workshop, there's a lot of staff. How many people are supporting the numerical activities, the software activities? 0. They were cornered. They had to help us. It's just a one-off example, but I think it should be done maybe at a local, at the university level, because they can provide funding on the long term. so you can ensure the sustainability. Now we know that there will be someone looking after our software indefinitely. That's one solution. Of course, maybe there might be opportunities at research councils level, but once again, it will be for a short period of time, and I think it's crucial to have this continuity of support. And this can only be done at your local institution, I think.
I think continuity of support around software is an unsolved problem, right? There isn't really a solution for ongoing software maintenance. So the best thing that you can do in a research environment is make sure that the software is developed well in a way that if you do have a succession of grants that use it and build upon it, it's easy for a software engineer to come and pick it up. So making sure that the code is understandable, making sure it's available, making sure it's got an appropriate license, all of those things that RSEs love to do when they work with software. In terms of the question that you initially kind of raised, I don't see it being a separate thing as there's research and then a kind of not a novel bit of software development. Research is a team process, right? And that's all part of the novel research. Whether or not the software is novel in itself, it's a contributing factor towards it. So it should be funded as part of that research process. And if you need that type of development as part of your grant, then employ a research software engineer that can help you with it, or go to a research software engineering team and talk to them. And yeah,
I think one thing that's, as you're both speaking there, there is this really important thing that the institution does on a lot of grants, and that is produce some sort of host institutional support statement of one form or another. And actually, even if you're not kind of funded through kind of the, some of your effort through the, directly through that grant, there's all sorts of indirect stuff because there is a, research computing function or whatever that can add value, or in many ways that can really help strengthen these grant proposals. And so playing those kind of things, I think is really important. Billy, do you want to?
Yeah, very briefly, we're aware of how oversubscribed the last software call was. It is, we're not ignoring it. It's something we're taking back as a team, and people are trying to come up with some solutions for it. It's not being ignored. We know how oversubscribed it was, is all I can say about that right now, I think.
Do you have anything else in the room before? Yeah.
The part of grant writing that I find the hardest is getting project partners on board. So I just find it quite awkward approaching people. It kind of feels like calling in favours and asking them to write something. So I wanted to ask, what weight do you put on that, on securing the correct project partners? And how do you go about, do you cold call people, for example, if you see somebody and you might not know them, but you think they've got the perfect skill set for the project, would you just drop them an email and ask them to be involved? How do you approach that?
Phil, you can go first.
Thank you. Well, that's an excellent question. I think it depends. It depends what relationship you're after as well. I think it's a slightly harder conversation to cold call conversation if someone has skills you need for your project, because it's your project, and many people, their skills are being put to use. There aren't many people going, well, I don't really know what I'm going to do for the next 6 months. That's not normally the problem. There are groups, of course, that established RSE groups. One of the problems is building up funding. So if you go to an established RSE team that has skills you need, they'd probably be delighted if you were going to, say, work with them properly to develop it and, and cost it and help. So that's a different thing. The way I approached it is the project partners were either people I knew, and I knew that they were interested in what I was wanting to do, or there were people I chatted to at conferences and events like this, and after their talk or after they said, that was very interesting, I'm doing this, how is their scope? And so it wasn't, that was the cold call. I wasn't coming along with, a 6-page blank case for support. That I was coming along, this is what I do, this, what you do is really interesting, and talking, and then you have a shared interest, hopefully. Or if not, you've had a nice cup of coffee or something together. So I think just emailing someone you don't know completely out of the blue and basically asking them to come in on your grant is really hard. I won't say don't do it. Sometimes, that is the way. But generally speaking, try and build up relationships ahead of time. If you know someone doing something interesting, talk to them.
So move to Marion, and back on the...
Just maybe my experience with that. So when I wrote my RSE fellowship application, which was not successful, I actually did approach people that I thought would be useful project partners, and I had quite good experience with that. So sometimes it was that they then pointed me to someone else, and then I said like, oh, I spoke to so-and-so, and they said that you might be a good partner. So it worked relatively well, and I had really good conversations out of that. Afterwards, I had to go to them and say, like, yeah, sorry, would have been nice, but didn't work out. But generally, I think people were quite happy to be approached and being told, oh, you're doing great stuff, and I think we could do something interesting together.
Ed, over here.
Hi. Speaking as someone who writes letters of support rather than asks for them, one thing I really like is if when someone asks me for a letter of support, they say, would you like me to draft it for you? And then I can edit it a bit, I can put a few bits in that I want and send it back to them. If someone says, like you say, please give me a sort of long letter of support and don't give me any information, it takes me a lot longer to reply with that.
And you're probably not going to say the things that they want to hear either, are you?
Matt, and then Chris.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that there's different kinds of partner in a project. There's the co-investigator, the collaborator who has a direct research input, and they are really people that you need to be very closely involved with in the creating of the science case, in the creating of all the documents. And I echo entirely what Phil and people said before, you need to have that relationship, you need to be working together as close as you can during the preparation stage and also during the project execution stage. These can't be people you cold calls, you don't know how they're going to work, you've got to have that prior relationship, in my experience. The other thing you can have is the external project partners, and they're the people who you get the less support from, and I agree entirely. If you can draft a letter of support and say, here's a suggestion, please edit it as you like, that goes an awful long way, because they're all busy people, and they're putting in the, well, this research would be useful for us because it would tie in with this, and we can support them in this way. EPSA like to see project partners producing something and giving something to the project, not just someone who writes let support, but says, I will contribute X in kind, and this will benefit my research in this way. Those are people which can be a little bit more distant, but if you cold call a company and say, I like what you do, would you be involved in my grant? And they've never heard of you before, that's a very big ask. And so, again, it comes down to relationship and building those relationships all the time as you're going through everyday life, so that when the call comes, you've got those people in mind to, it might be good to pick up the phone and talk to Mark at AWE or whoever it is and say, right, let's see if we can actually take that idea we talked about at that conference 6 months ago, and now this is the chance to do something with it.
Thanks, Matt. Chris?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Matt, actually. This is not what I was going to ask, but I think you know that you're ready to write a grant when those partnerships with your collaborators feel solid. And all my successful grants have been where I've just had a slightly unquantifiable feeling that the time was right. Anyway, what I was going to say is just on the letter of support thing, add a new dimension maybe. So I'm a statistician. The worst kind of projects I've ever been involved in are the ones where somebody's pulled me in, 5%, 10% onto a grant, essentially to crank a handle on some very boring, unnovel statistics, which actually they could have done themselves. We went through a period, I think, particularly in MRC, BBSRC, where statisticians on projects were the sort of the RSEs on projects nowadays. And I think the important thing back then was, if you were writing a letter of support as a project partner, to say, yeah, we will support the statistics in this, there's some kind of buy-in. There's some kind of, it goes two ways. There's an advantage to me as somebody writing that letter of support. This is going to benefit my research program, as well as the advantage to the person who's writing the grant, that they'll get your expertise. So I think it has to be a two-way street.
Thanks very much.
Can I add?
Yeah, of course.
Just from what I said earlier about when you're kind of leveraging people's skills, I stand by that. But there are other times when you might be cold calling people because it's their interests that you're want, you know, and a lot of people are much freer with advice and expertise and experience. And one of the people I kind of cold called when I was doing my fellowship was actually Paul, because I wanted to do some GPU work, and I knew Paul cared about that kind of stuff. And I ended up being invited to a GPU hackathon that was part of Paul's support. And in that case, Paul was planning to run the hackathon anyway. I wasn't saying give me, you know, money or time or anything beyond what he was doing, but it was matching those two things up together. So it was
mutually beneficial.
It was mutually beneficial. It wasn't, you know, it was what both of us wanted to do. So there are very natural opportunities sometimes where it is kind of cold calling someone, but you're not saying, here's what I care about, dragging them in. It's what you both care about. There's an overlap.
Thanks. Really?
Yeah, just to add to that on the sort of reviewer panel side of things, I think it's worth looking at your project holistically. So does it all marry up? Is it succinct? Or are you adding on project partners or work packages that are just, you know, this will be good if I put this name on there. It doesn't, you know, more is not better is what I would say there. You know, just make sure it all looks good together as a project.
I think that brings us on to something kind of you mentioned the other aspect of this, because we talked about preparation and getting this thing in, but actually something that can help significantly is actually the review process. Okay, and I think I saw somewhere on Twitter, not that I really look at Twitter that much, but there was a kind of like, does reading lots of failed grants, you know, in review actually help you form a better grant later and things like that? And I think to some extent, you know, when we're saying that the you know, the explicit opportunities for you know, the RSE fellowships and that kind of thing are not there, but actually what opportunities are there to get that kind of, for DRI professionals to get more of an insight into the whole review panel process, what goes on, what sort of, you know, what kind of conversations take place, you know, and so that they can take those home, take them on board and kind of, you know, process it and then help people get more effective grants and things. Do you want to say something about that first, Billy?
Yeah, look on our website is what I would say to begin with. We have panel guidance documents on there, so you can look at how the and we have reviewer guidance documents, so you can sort of see what we're asking reviewers and panelists to do. Always concentrate on the assessment criteria when writing a project. That's what we ask them to look at, right? We ask them to look at the assessment criteria. So if you know, and that's what they're going to be scoring it on. And yeah, I think that without sort of going into too much, yeah, that's what I'll say concentrate on.
Another way is that you can, you know, people can be kind of, you know, the sort of silent person in the room, or observers or anything like that. Do you ever run any of those sorts of processes?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do get in contact with us. And you know, if you want to find out about the review process or the panel process, the best way to do that is to review or be on a panel. And you know, we're always looking. So usually how we do it at EPSRC, and of course it is slightly different in different councils, is we'll ask you to, if you're on our list, we'll ask you to review a few proposals first, and then if you've done that and given us some good reviews, sort of in-depth reviews kind of thing, we'll ask you onto a panel.
Thanks. Sylvain, do you talk about the?
Yes, I think for a PSRC, very often you have the opportunity to respond to provide the response to the reviewers. Most of the proposals and fellowship are like this, and this is a crucial moment for your proposal. If your marks, even if your marks or your feedbacks are really good, it's still very important to try to read, once again, a lot of time, all the reviews that you get, try to find any inconsistencies, any disagreement, any issues with your project. And I will say that the response to the reviewers is probably as important as the grant itself. It's very, very important. Of course, there's a lot of discussion. I got an unfair review, and you want to be aggressive, and you're like, this is unfair, this is unacceptable. It's definitely not the right state of mind. I mean, with my first grant, I was always upset with at least one reviews, but that's you need to get over it. You need to be constructive. You need to convince the panel that maybe you try to convey your idea differently. You try to address the negative comments from one or two reviewers, but it's important to do it in a constructive way. Once again, you don't want to convince the reviewers. You want to convince the panel that you have addressed any issues correctly. And I think this is a very, very important step of the proposal. The other thing, as Billy mentioned, if you want to have an idea on how panels are working, if you cannot get into a panel, talk to people who were in a panel at some point. It's a fascinating discussion that you will have. You will realize that this is probably not what you think it is. It's a very long process. There are some guidelines every stage of the way, and it's done. I think it's done. They are trying to be as neutral as possible, obviously, and I think it's done as rigorously as possible. But it's important to know how it's working, and the response to referees is a key part. When the panel is going to look at your proposal, you will have someone who will introduce. There's a lot of things. You have someone introducing the proposal to the panel. There's a lot of things going on. So try to speak to someone who was in a panel at some point. It can be panel for fellowship. It can be panel for any type of grant and any type of research. It's very valuable information that you will get. Once again, when you are preparing your grant, having this knowledge on how your proposal is going to be assessed. And once again, in the call, you will have information. Is it going to be about quality, national importance, all these things? Once again, you need to think very carefully when you're writing your grant. But yeah, speak to someone who was in a panel if you cannot get in.
I couldn't agree with that more about the PI response, by the way. That it's so important. And just try and ignore the scores. Try not to, if you need to take a couple of days away, read it, take a couple of days away, go, okay, actually, I can come up with a really good constructive response to these, and I can use that as a positive, and that is really the best way to do it.
And get some help from outside, because you will write a first draft. You will be very maybe aggressive, or take some time off. Usually you have 5 working days to submit, but so you need to work out when the reviews will come back and try to find some time to do it. Usually it's a short period of time. Can maybe ask for 1 or 2 days extension if you are lucky, but ask for others to read your reviews. They will say, oh my god, you are too aggressive, or you didn't address this point, you didn't address this point, and you're like, well, I don't think it's important. But someone else will tell you, well, actually, I think this is very important. You need to address this. But yeah, the response to PI is key to get funded.
Could I just add as well, so this kind of get yourself on a panel, it's not always that easy to just like insert yourself onto a panel. But what you should do, particularly if you're kind of a research software engineer, is apply to be on the things like the EPSRC peer review college. As an RSC, there are not enough people on that college that know how to review software. And sure, everything that my colleagues have said is absolutely true in terms of gaining that experience to help your grant. Yeah, but if we want to change kind of the research culture itself and make sure that, as part of the assessment, the software is being considered, there has to be experts that can be relied on to kind of comment on that aspect of the proposal, and that can't happen if people are not on the peer review college. So, just go and join it, please. It's not that difficult, and then you'll get these types of opportunities like peer reviewing and going on panels and so on.
And I think also for the ECSC grants, you can be observer in the panel. You can. There's a small application. You say, I just want to be in a ECSC panel. and you can see how it's working. It's a great opportunity.
Just, if I could just briefly add, we're naturally talking about research software engineering because we've got 2 RSE fellows, and we've got another scientific computing RSE person. But this is everyone in DRI, so don't think, oh, all I do is hardware, for example. There are I mean, Alan's just been on a grant for this event attached to a tier 2 facility, so that's hardware and soft skills. Research software is kind of, you know, both of those are critical, but this is really important. And even if all you ever do is go to your institution and say, we need a new tier 3, whatever, when you're trying to build an internal case, some of those people assessing it are academics who are thinking, I know how you assess this. You do this like EPSRC or NERC or whatever. You know, you might disagree with that, but knowing the process and knowing what academics thinking a case should look like is also really useful.
So I'm going to ask you a specific question around this whole review process and being on panels in terms of how has being part of being like the review panel, you know, influenced your kind of way of actually then going on and writing a grant? Okay.
I'll kind of answer that question.
Yeah.
So the thing that surprised me kind of most on being on a panel was the number of applications, so particularly for the fellowships, the number of applications that missed the point, that had fantastic track records but hadn't properly read the call document. We said this right at the beginning, read the call document, you know, read it. But they just missed the point, and they were applying like it was a traditional fellowship, and they probably could have very easily, you know, resold what they were doing and kind of hit all the points that were required by the reviewers and by the panel, but just didn't. So that kind of really opened my eyes in terms of making sure that you read the call document and make it really easy for the reviewer to pick out the parts that they need.
Yeah, Katie.
Thanks. Just on that point, Alan, I spent 10 years doing a similar job to Billy, and the thing that always stays with me is the grants that were successful had the compelling vision. And if you always need to start your proposal with the high level. This is what I want to do. This is the problem I'm going to solve, and this is why you should care. And I think if you can do that, and then obviously you have to back it up with the technical detail to satisfy the expert reviewers, but remembering that panel members, there may not be someone from your domain on that panel. And so you have to be able to talk to a general scientific audience with that compelling vision. And I think if you can do that, you've won a big step forward in the battle.
I think to Paul's point as well, to the panels that I've sat on, you know, around kind of maybe it surprised me the thing that sometimes is the really important thing that is basically the make or break about whether things actually go through or not, and the kind of difference of opinions. In the terms of you read one of these things, think this is like really good, I'm really supporting this, and someone over there just kind of, you know, sort of says something that's just the diametric opposite of what you're saying, and you think, are these guys just having a thought experiment and just seeing how far this can go, or are they actually? And you see then everybody kind of coming together on a really rigorous process and an outcome that's actually really defendable, and it's really interesting to see how that all comes together in a very kind of neutral way.
I think that the really good grants are really obvious that they're really good when you read them. I think that the process of being on a panel was that what we ended up with is the really obviously good ones, and they all go to the front, and they really obviously don't get it and not right, and they go to the back, and then there's some muddy ones in the middle that require quite a lot of discussion and argument, but there's always a chunk that are just easy, you know, they're right at the front, and it's because it just comes naturally when you read it that it's a good application and it makes sense and the vision is there, and yeah.
Just sort of on the vision and technical side of it, you can be too close to your project. It is quite a good idea to take a step back and let someone else have a read of it, because then they can ask questions which will help you better explain some of the more technical sides of your proposal. And you know, as has been said already, sometimes there isn't someone in your specific domain. So being able to explain that sort of technical part of it in a clear way is important.
Yeah, and if you're doing things not technical as well, like if you're trying to change your community, then it's important that you kind of make that credible. Just saying, I'm going to change the community. You know, have you spoken to them? Do you have project partners? How are you going to do that? Are you going to come like a bull in a china shop and you're going to tell some people with 30 years in the field that they're doing it wrong? I mean, you need to make sure that it's not just, I'm going to do this very, very specific technology, but you also need to make sure that in other areas you aren't just being vague and, you know, magical unicorn things without how are you going to do that and what, you know, buy-in are you going to get.
Is there anybody, anything else in the room or online that we, Louise?
Just following on from the thing of being able to understand stuff, so my experience from being on panels is that you'll get some applications that are completely outside my field, sort of theoretical physics or whatever, and I'm an engineer. But I read it and I think, yes, I know, I understand that, I can understand what you're going to do, and I completely get it. And then there'll be something else that's quite close to what I do, and I get to the end of reading it and I think, I haven't the faintest idea what you're actually going to do. And it's that whole thing of making it clear to someone who's outside your domain, but also really being clear about what you're actually going to do. You know, this is what my idea, and this is exactly how I'm going to do it, and just making it really clear so that somebody can understand it, because there's a huge difference.
Matt, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, just to echo that and pick up a point that Sylvain made earlier on, the grant applications that I've done that have been really successful are the ones where I've had the time or taken the time to get external people to read it before I submitted it. And when it's been rushed and I just sort of said, okay, that's good enough, I've had lots of people part of the work, there's lots of eyes who've looked at it already, and I've submitted it, those are the ones that don't get such a good ride. Because they're too close to it, they're too involved with it. If you get people who are external to your domain to review it as part of the internal process, some departments insist on the internal process, some leave it a bit more relaxed, or if you're up against deadline, you kind of push it through regardless. So when I get people in my department whom I respect, who are senior experienced people in a totally different area, they make the best critiques. If they can't understand what I'm doing, then the panel won't. And if they get it, then the panel might. It's not a guarantee. But you know, that's when you get that independent critical review, and that's really helpful. It can be quite hurtful, but if you're hurt by what your friends say, you've got no chance of surviving what the panel says. So you've got to then take those comments on board and tweak it so that it will get past them if there's any chance of getting past a panel. The other thing, in response to what Alan said at the beginning, is about what have you learned from being on panels, etc., and how has that improved your writing? One thing I learned very early on by being on a panel was, oh, I never thought you could say it like that. I never thought you could ask for that kind of support. It's a real eye-opener to see what people can ask for and get away with, and how they can sell it, and you suddenly get a whole new perspective, because you tend to go into grant writing thinking in the way that you normally think. And by reading a whole variety of different proposals, you see there's different ways of structuring things, different ways of selling things, different ways of support and things you can put into a grant, but you never thought of asking for help with public communication and why that might help your grant, or you never thought about. And so having that experience is really useful. And the other thing that when I did my first panel that came across really, really powerfully was the numerical scores aren't that important. It's the text comments the referees write and how the PI responds to them. That bit that Sylvain was talking about is really crucial, because that's what the panel will look at. The panel not everyone on the panel will read every line of your proposal, but they will read every line of the referee reports and every line of your response. It will all read that. So that is really, really, really important. You can't fudge that. And when you get the referee comments, you know, sometimes the referee's a blithering idiot, and why can't they possibly understand what you've said? You know, but you've got to take a step back, you've got to cool down, and you've got to write a calm and reasoned response. And don't let anything that's a possible criticism or negative about your grant go through without challenging it in your response. It really is make or break.
Could I add a...
Yeah, of course.
So on that note, one thing I learned from not getting my first RSE fellowship was don't take anything for granted. Don't assume that if a panel has got, in that case, I think 200 and odd applications first time, they're going to very, very carefully read every single line and remember it by the time they've finished it. So I had some comments of, why I'm surprised there isn't a letter of support from such and such. Well, there was. But what I learned from that is, if I need someone to realise that there's a letter of support from, you know, a particularly strategic partner is on board, put it in the case, put it at the start, you know, and we have involved key project partners such as Blur, and put it at the end. This summary includes project partners. You know, if it's important that your host institution is offering you a permanent post, for example, then make sure that you say they are offering a permanent post. Don't assume everyone's going to read the 2 pages that your head of department wrote, including how amazing the department is. That's not really relevant. It's a sales pitch for the university and their vision. You know, make sure you pick out the bits you really want people to know yourself.
Question online?
Yes, here's a question online. And this is about accessibility, so whether there is a mechanism to support people who may be dyslexic or so. I'm not quite sure whether this is about when they're writing the grant proposal or also throughout for the process itself.
I'd say definitely get in touch with us if there's anything like that. We try and be as inclusive as possible. There will be a mechanism. I don't know it off the top of my head, but there will be some mechanism for that where we can support as well.
So one thing that I'd like to just pick up on, just because I think it's a kind of basic thing which really helped me do, maybe, so the B grant was probably the first grant that I'd really written, kind of took ownership of, right, and kind of wrote it. And it made this one a lot easier, having been doing that. And actually what I did was I camped out for like literally 3 weeks in Matt's office. But Matt's, you know, experienced at getting grants for all sorts of things, and he went through the entire thing with me, telling me what bit went where, for what reason, what kind of style I should be using, right? Don't go, well, maybe we'll think about doing something like this, right? Be positive. We will do this. We will do that. You know, everything from your tone through to, you know, and I do remember the kind of the division of labour where you'd have thought between a scientist and a technical person, the science case would probably be written by the scientist and the technical bit was written by the technical bit, but it was totally the other way round, because I think we were trying to reach out to, you know, to the other person with what we were saying. So we all made sure that we kind of, it wasn't just us conveying technical, me conveying technical things because I was a technical person, because only a technical person would understand it. Matt was doing that bit so that it played back to other people and things like that were the kind of real simple things, but insanely helpful. We've got maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Is there anything else that people want to do before I throw out a kind of closing question to everybody to be?
I've got, it's not going to fit in,
No.
but I've got a little hack for kind of software engineering when it goes on a grant, so can I just throw that out? Quite often when you put a proposal in, if you don't think about licensing, then by the time you've done the work, the university will own all the IP, and licensing afterwards becomes problematic because you might have to go through a commercialization process. So if you know up front that you've written some software or you've got some data set, if you write it into the proposal what license you'd like to attach to it, it will naturally have to go through the research office and get a big tick of approval, and you can save yourself a bit of time and frustration if you think about that up front. That's the type of advice you'd get from if you spoke to an RSE group, obviously, but if you haven't and you want to do that, then yeah.
Okay, so Nikki.
Yeah, just to echo what Alan was saying there, I was very fortunate to work in a team doing grants in a different sector. And if you've got a little team where you've got a lovely symbiotic sort of writing relationship where you really complement each other, do hang on to that and do cultivate that relationship, because it's invaluable later on. And even if the people who you write really well with aren't people you're working with on future grant applications, if you've got that relationship, it's really useful to be able to throw a grant or some proposal under their nose to have a look at and get their feedback, particularly, like I say, if you work well with them.
So my last 1 minute, right, okay, and it's kind of looking at success rates, okay, dealing with rejection is a proper thing, right? So, with grant rejection, how do you pick yourself back up again? Phil?
Take a break, go for a coffee. If you have to rage to someone, not internally. And yeah, just at some point you have to look at it and go, is that justified or not? The day you get the rejection is not that point. But maybe a month later, you say, okay, maybe that was a bad idea, or maybe I didn't communicate that. The referee, it wasn't the referee's an idiot, I didn't communicate that well enough. Use that to be positive next time round.
Yeah, I think sometimes, you know, some of the comments aren't, you know, shouldn't be taken like personally, and look at maybe some of that, there might be tooling about how you might kind of position things in the future. Talk to the department. Actually, if we had this vehicle, it might work, like the RSE team or something in some cases, because I haven't really thought about software sustainability or those sort of things. So I think that the whole thing needs to be seen as a constructive process, even though it can be insanely personally depressing.
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course. Go for it.
Just two things. What I do when my grant is not successful, so, well, it's easier said than done. You try to move on, of course, but after 2 or 3 months, I try to read my proposal again, read the reviews again, with a lot of, you know, you wrote the proposal probably 1 year ago or so on and so on. And then you will, it's very helpful exercise, because you will realize that, well, actually, the referee point was a good one. You didn't maybe communicate well enough, and so on and so on. So it's always good to read your old proposals, the unsuccessful one, try to understand the referee's objections. And the second thing is, once again, it's easier said than done, but don't have the imposter syndrome when you write your proposal, or when you feel sorry for yourself because you were not successful. It's a very competitive, in the UK, it's a very competitive environment. So, I mean, we have successful grants, we have a lot of unsuccessful grants. That's fine. It's part of the job. Yeah, when you write a proposal, be positive, be confident, don't have the imposter syndrome. As we said before, don't say, well, maybe I will do that. You say, I am going to do this and this and this, and this is how I'm going to do it. This is my vision, and I trust this is the right thing to do for this particular problem. You need to be confident. You don't need to be overconfident. There is a fine line, but you need to be really positive and confident in what you are proposing. After all, you are probably the best person to do the job. So it's really important to keep this in mind as well.
Okay. Sorry, you're pointing, Matt.
I mean, I've had plenty of grants that have been unsuccessful, and there's loads of positive ways that you can put a spin on it, but there's no getting away from it that they hurt, right? And it's,
yeah.
It's fine, they do, and you just have to kind of accept that, I guess, and you can use these positive techniques. But yeah, I'm not going to lie, there's still grants that I look back on and think, oh God, that's annoying, I wish I'd got that. And yeah, but that's just part of it, I guess.
Could I add some really good advice I had when putting grant together? So you get all this feedback when you're putting it together, and maybe you've had a few rejected and they didn't. If they reject it because they honestly didn't like what you proposed, it's really personal, but that is kind of okay. You just disagree on something. What you shouldn't do is change what you propose so that it is successful and it's not what you actually want. One of the best advice I had writing a proposal is, because you get lots of things, what if you did that, that's very popular, or that goes down well. really think about it. You want the rejection to be the bad news. You don't want the successful grant proposal to be the bad news. James Hetherington touched on this a little bit yesterday. Sometimes something you're not so keen on, you get dragged in on. Just make sure that you are still happy to do that. If you're not wanting to do it, don't put it through. It doesn't matter whether the panel will love it or not.
Okay, brilliant. So thank you very much, everybody, on this. It's been really interesting. I think we're about time, aren't we? We're just over. Brilliant. So thank you very much, everybody on this panel. It's been really interesting. That one.